by visiting our website gbnews.com.
We've blown the budget by giving you the chance to win a totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope in for Nigel Farage tonight. He's on his way for a well-deserved break in America, but lots to discuss. First, after Irish and UK ministers met this morning to discuss an influx of asylum seekers coming from Northern Ireland, Downing Street says it will not take back migrants from Ireland. We look at what happens next in Scotland after the SNP leader Humza Yousaf quit earlier today, triggering a search for a successor and a new Scottish First Minister. And after more than 200,000 people signed a petition backed by terminally ill broadcaster Dame Esther Ranson, MPs today debated in Parliament whether dying people should be able to ask for medical assistance to end their lives. We'll discuss all that and more after the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening. Our top stories tonight. The SNP is preparing for a leadership contest after the Scottish First Minister announced his resignation. Humza Yousaf's admitted that he underestimated the level of upset that he would cause by cutting political ties with the Greens. He'll now continue in his post until a replacement can be found. Clearly emotional, Mr Yousaf said he's quitting to help repair relationships across the political divide.
No ill will and certainly bear no grudge against anyone. Politics can be a brutal business. It takes its toll on your physical and mental health. Your family suffer alongside you. I am in absolute debt to my wonderful wife, my beautiful children and my wider family for putting up with me over the years. I'm afraid you'll be seeing a lot more of me from now.
The race to replace Humza Yousaf starts now. Former Deputy First Minister John Swinney says he's considering it carefully.
I've got lots of things to think about. There's the whole question of my family, and I have to make sure that I do the right thing by my family. They're precious to me. I have to do the right thing by my party and by my country. So there's lots to be thought about, and I'll give all of that consideration in the days to come.
Dozens of migrants have been rescued from the Channel after their small boat got into difficulties off the French coast. It's understood that a number of people were pulled from the water and taken to the port at Calais. The latest rescue operation comes after senior Border Force officials raised concerns that people in small boats are using children as human shields to evade police. Last week, over 900 migrants crossed to the UK. Well, the Northern Ireland Secretary says the government is surprised by how quickly their Rwanda plan appears to be working. Speaking at a British-Irish conference in London, Chris Heaton-Harris said they hadn't expected the deterrent effect to begin before flights took off. It comes after the Irish government said it's seen an 80% increase in asylum seekers entering from Northern Ireland. They want to return them to the UK, but the government says that will only be possible if we can send small boat migrants back to the EU.
It was always going to be the case. We believed as a government that our Rwanda policy would act as a deterrent for people coming to this country illegally. I think we are slightly surprised that it's manifested itself so quickly after the Act became law, and we are now in the process of making sure that we are gathering those individuals who could qualify for the first flight to be on that first flight.
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now let's go straight back to Chris.
Thank you for joining me on Farage. Now, tonight, tensions are escalating between the UK and Ireland as the asylum debate takes centre stage. Downing Street is standing firm, refusing to take back asylum seekers from Ireland until the EU-wide asylum rules are revised, and France takes migrants who cross to here, to England, often by boat, across the English Channel. The disagreement comes as Ireland rushes to implement emergency laws to stem the rising tide of asylum seekers who are crossing its border with Northern Ireland. The Irish government blames a recent surge in asylum seekers on the UK government's Rwanda policy that only became law last Thursday. Remember, though, Michael Martin, at the time the Prime Minister of Ireland in March 2022, he said the following: "We have an open border with Northern Ireland. That's not going to change, be that for pandemic reasons or be that for refugee reasons." So what has changed? Because something clearly has. Well, earlier today, UK and Irish ministers met to discuss their asylum arrangements. And GB News' Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been following this story across the day. Mark, good evening.
Good evening to you.
What an extraordinary comeuppance may be for Ireland demanding during the talks on Brexit an open border, and now they're concerned about that same open border.
Yeah, well, not just that. For years, there has been a loophole, as it has been described by Dublin, which has worked exactly the other way, in that many migrants have taken advantage of open borders in Europe to enter Ireland and then to come up through that border into the United Kingdom, through into Northern Ireland and across on ferries to the UK mainland. That has been happening for years and has been of significant concern to ministers here in London. So now we have a situation where, according to Dublin, they are saying that 80% of those asylum seekers that they are now seeing in Ireland, they believe are coming from the north of Ireland. Now, that's being disputed by some of the human rights charities in Ireland at the moment, because the government seems to be basing their assessment on the fact that the vast majority of those who are claiming asylum are doing it through the International Protection Office in Dublin rather than at airports and ports. However, these charities say that just because they're not actually applying for asylum immediately they land or arrive at a ferry port doesn't mean that they've come from Northern Ireland down. It may just be that they've delayed their decision to actually claim asylum. So that 80% mark might not be quite as high as the government in Ireland are suggesting. Regardless, it is quite an unseemly row that is developing here. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, with his counterpart Michael Martin today in London, were trying to sound conciliatory, but it's clear on listening to Chris Heaton-Harris that they are not going to bend, London that is, to this request from Ireland to have migrants returned back over the border because of the situation with France refusing to take migrants across the Channel. This is what he said.
The agreement on returns, we've been told all the way through since we left the European Union that the UK must deal with the European Union as a whole entity. And so anything on returns has to be dealt with on that basis. And we obviously are working with our European partners, because this is a shared endeavour to try and stop criminal gangs illegally importing, exporting people, human trafficking people across the continent of Europe into the United Kingdom, into Ireland.
From our perspective, and I'm very clear that the common travel area generally and that framework has been very beneficial to Irish citizens and to United Kingdom citizens, and it covers a lot, including migration, and both governments are committed to working together in the time ahead to dealing with issues, many issues, including migration.
Well, rather inconveniently for the government in Dublin, their Supreme Court ruled last month that the UK wasn't regarded as a safe third country because of the Rwanda policy. So they are going to try to push through emergency legislation that they say would allow them to put these migrants back north of the border into the UK. However, Rishi Sunak was quite clear today in saying that that will not happen as long as the UK is not allowed to return migrants to France.
Well, Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, thank you for joining us tonight with that update. Now, joining us now in the studio in Westminster here is Mark Francois, Tory MP for Raleigh and Wickford and Chairman of the European Research Group of Tory MPs, an anti-EU group, and a member of the Defence Select Committee. Mark, welcome to the studio.
Evening.
Why are you smiling?
Well, because the Irish government are now hoist by their own petard, Chopper. The stench of hypocrisy over this is worse than a 10-year-old pint of Guinness that's gone off. I mean, I remember all the way through what I call the Battle of Brexit in the House of Commons, being told night after night, week after week, including by people quoting the Irish government, and then seeing it in clips from Dublin, no hard border on the island of Ireland under any circumstances. Complete free movement across that border. And, you know, as your correspondent rightly pointed out, there was a loophole which was known as the Dublin Convention. And so now to have the Irish government squealing that these rules are against their national interest when they are the people that argued for them for years is... You couldn't make it up.
Michael Martin, of course, at the time Prime Minister,
yes,
now in London with Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, saying that even on a refugee issue, that border must stay open.
Correct.
Now it can't stay open. To what extent do you think, though, that this problem emerged last Thursday, the very day the Rwanda bill became law, and now it is law, and now you've got the Guardian in today saying we're going to start rounding up UK asylum seekers. Almost you couldn't pay for advertising if you're the government, I imagine. If you're certainly the PM would be quite happy with that headline. But to what extent is it a real issue, or are they just trying to blame the UK for their own asylum problems?
Well, Michael Martin, as you say, at the time of all these arguments, was the Taoiseach. He was the Prime Minister of Ireland. He's now the Foreign Minister. And he said last week that 80% of asylum seekers arriving in Ireland, in the Republic, have come from Northern Ireland because of, his words, the Rwanda effect. So here's the man who a few years ago was saying under no circumstances could there be any kind of border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, now complaining bitterly about what he calls the Rwanda effect. Now, that would seem to imply that, at least in the Republic of Ireland, that legislation is now starting to have a material effect. And don't forget, the European People's Party, the EPP, Ursula von der Leyen and all of those, David Cameron took our MEPs out. I was the project manager for that when I was the Shadow Europe Minister. You know the history. The EPP, in their manifesto for the European elections, are now apparently saying, quote, "We want to implement the concept of safe third countries." This is the European People's Party, who, of course, were desperately in favour of Theresa May's original deal. So, you know, the whole world tonight is kind of spinning through 180 degrees.
And going back towards maybe where the UK government is, although what's different, I think, is that Rwanda is a deportation scheme, not a protesting scheme. Once you go to northern Rwanda, you're not going to come back. And that's the difference, maybe, with what we're looking at within the EU.
Well, the government have said repeatedly you should not be able to come into the United Kingdom illegally and be able to stay. So the Rwanda scheme has always been designed as a deterrent. Here's the irony, that a government in the Republic who argued for years for no kind of border control at all are the people that are now telling us in London that it does have a deterrent effect. Hang on, it does have a deterrent effect, and they don't like it.
And the scheme is starting to work. I mean, are you surprised by that? You've been concerned about it. You've been concerned about the way it was all structured, weren't you?
Yes, no,
you led the 5 families in and out of the...
Look, it's absolutely true, Chopper, that I and some of my colleagues had concerns about the absolute legal technicalities of the bill, and we'll see how that plays through.
Yes.
But it does seem that the overall scheme, and now we have the bill has become an act, despite the House of Lords, that it is beginning to have an effect. And don't take it from me, as the chairman of the European Research Group, take it from the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ireland. And I say again, who for years and years, these people were arguing we could not have any kind of border restriction on the island of Ireland under any circumstances. Well, guess what? You know, history appears to have moved on a bit.
It's very rare we see you so happy in the studio, Mark Franson. Normally you're steaming with anger about this government, but there we are. Another reason why you're happy is the 2.5% target on GDP spending. You've got an idea of how that money should be spent.
Yeah, no, sorry, to be fair, this government are absolutely right to stand firm on this, and I hope they'll continue to do so. Now, 2.5%, yes, another good decision by the government. I was delighted last week when we announced we're going to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. I'd like to see it get to 3%, but let's not be churlish. 2.5% is a lot better than 2%. And that means we can begin to recapitalise our armed forces. We can plug some of the capability gaps that we have. And the most important thing that the Prime Minister said in Poland last week was he was putting the defence industry, in his words, on a war footing, because the history shows us the best way to prevent war, to deter war, is by showing any potential aggressor, who may or may not be called Vladimir Putin, that you're prepared to fight and to win.
And what project, particularly with the money on? We know Israel was protected by the Iron Dome, wasn't it? From
yes, and that seems to have been 99% successful. We have a very limited air defence system in the United Kingdom. We know from Ukraine that Russia tends to launch massive cruise missile strikes from its bombers. We don't really have an air defence system that's equipped to cope with that. Now that we have these extra resources, as a priority, we should start to invest in creating an Iron Dome of our own.
Well, Mark Francois, senior figure on the Defence Select Committee and, of course, chairman of the European Research Group of Tory MPs. Thank you for coming to the studio and joining us today on GB News.
Thank you for having me, John.
Thank you. Now, as crossings continue, Border Force officials have told GB News of big concerns that Channel migrants are using children, yes, children, as human shields to stop police puncturing their small boats. Our colleague Mark White was given exclusive access to the small boat's operational command in Dover. Here's what he saw.
This is a rare look inside the small boat's operational command at Dover Harbour. As we filmed, the Border Force vessel Defender was alongside, offloading another 66 Channel migrants, the latest of more than 7,000 who've arrived here so far this year. And this, their mode of transport, large but extremely flimsy inflatable rafts, made for the criminal gangs in backstreet factories.
I mean, these aren't seaworthy for anything because they are just not made to any standard.
Trevor Taylor has seen increasing numbers packed into these vessels. 70 or 80 migrants on each boat is now common.
It's just not safe. The way it's constructed, I mean, this is typical where if there was a cut or a puncture in one part of this boat, the whole thing would go down.
Makeshift puncture repair kits and cheap pumps are often all the migrants have as they battle to stay afloat. And there are very few, if any, effective life jackets.
Just show you an example of that. And that's probably not just for a child, they'll probably give that to an adult as well, saying that's going to save you. Another example, just back here, is an inner tube. We quite often see them, or they're handed out in a packet. So basically, if you panic, inflate one of those yourself.
And the engines too are completely unsuitable for the English Channel, lacking power and prone to breaking down.
You look at the engine, you might think, yeah, that's a proper engine, something you might expect. However, the organised crime groups, they put stickers like this on there, so 30, trying to trick you into thinking, 30 horsepower. In reality, it's somewhere between 10 and 15, so really not suitable to go on the boat itself, especially at sea.
The surge in violence along the French coast is of huge concern to authorities on both sides of the channel. Staff in Dover have seen increasing numbers of migrants arriving with injuries, including stab wounds.
The violence that is now shown to our French colleagues, trying to prevent the launches, trying to save these people from putting their lives at risk, is huge. We've seen them attacked with sticks, metal bars, machetes, using women and children that are there to cross, using them as human shields to prevent law enforcement taking action. And it's growing, it's getting worse.
This quayside here at Dover Harbour is where the Channel migrants first set foot on British soil. Of course, if Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan comes to full fruition, then they won't be here for long. Many of them will be on a flight to East Africa. But those flights are likely still months away, and as weather conditions improve in the weeks ahead, many more of these flimsy migrant boats will arrive in UK waters, unseaworthy and dangerously overloaded. Mark White, GB News, at the Small Boats Operational Command in Dover.
Right, into one moment we'll discuss what next for Scotland after Humza Yousaf resigned as SNP leader earlier today. This is Farage with me, Christopher Hope, on GB News.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Mark White was saying there, Sue, that he thinks it's getting worse, and you were nodding along to that. You've seen this over decades. Situation is sprawling along the coast, more people,
yes.
And the danger is ramping up.
Definitely, because the numbers and the money it's run like a military operation. I mean, I've been told that by the National Crime Agency, and I don't need to be told it by them to know it. It is meticulous because there's so much money involved. So they're marshalling migrants here, the gangs, they're controlling the gangs, and there will be a kingpin. You know, in some city far away in Erbil, or even in Paris, or in Brussels, who never goes anywhere near the beaches. It's like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah. With that in mind, there's such vested interest, such money, such demand, a never-ending string of demand of people who want to come here.
People are already on their way, remember?
Yeah.
If we stop them now, they're already leaving. There's people leaving the Sudan now are going to reach the only place they want to get to, the French beaches, to get to the UK. They'll arrive in 2.5 years' time.
And so,
you see, they're on their way.
If it's that organised, that lucrative, that desirable, how on earth do we ever break that chain?
It sounds incredibly harsh, but I think if the EU change politically in the June elections, which I think it probably will,
yes,
I think they will put up, as the Greeks have done, holding camps all over Europe, the coasts of Europe, where people are assessed just to see who is coming in, which would be a plus, as the Greeks have done, because we have no idea who is coming in.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's been a rollercoaster week in Scottish politics. Tensions have been brewing since Humza Yousaf spectacularly torpedoed the SNP's coalition with the Greens. He then ruthlessly, or maybe foolhardily, sacked his coalition partners, the Green co-leaders, from their ministerial posts, saying it showed leadership. If you say so, mate. Immediately, though, he faced accusations that he was attempting to save his own skin and jump before he was pushed. He failed to score enough support to survive an upcoming no-confidence vote in himself and his party. And Humza the Brief, as he was dubbed by the Scottish press, was forced to throw in the towel at a press conference earlier today. Acknowledging that events that had led up to this moment, he said they clearly underestimated the level of hurt that ending his party's power-sharing agreement with the Greens had caused. Well, so what happens next? Well, joining us now to answer that question is GB News Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Tony, a long day for you, but briefly, what happens next?
Good evening. Well, certainly this has been a spectacular day at the end of 5 spectacular days for Humza Yousaf. But as also much often happens, seems to be that the conversation immediately moves on to who is next. So lots of names being run around over the weekend and into today. I think there's a few we could probably not spend too much time on. Neil Gray and of course Jenny Gilruth. But certainly Stephen Flynn was the Westminster leader of the SNP. He was, quite hotly contested to replace Humza Yousaf. But as we heard earlier on today, he has a very singular focus about wanting to be re-elected for his Westminster seat. So then that leaves Kate Forbes, who came tantalisingly close around this time last year, only pipped at the post by Humza Yousaf. And then John Swinney, the name that's being bandied around everywhere today. And I think Kate Forbes, for one, I think she represents something that the SNP has had to come to recognise about itself in the last few years, since really the formation of the Butte House Agreement, is that SNP now has a left and a right. And Kate Forbes very much speaks to that right side of the party. However, it's still questionable as to whether she could get enough votes. Of course, this is really all about passing things like budgets and other legislation. She could get Alba's vote from Ash Regan, but that would still only leave her 64, one short of an overall majority. And that then, I suppose, takes us to John Swinney. John Swinney has been with the Scottish National Party really since almost the waves were breaking on the shores of devolution. He actually ran as leader of the party back in 2003 in the election. He ended up losing 8 seats that year, going down from 35 to 27. But yet, he could offer a nice stopgap for the SNP. In fact, the other pro-independence parties could see him as a way of keeping the nationalist kind of agenda going, keeping the pro-independence parties at the top of the food chain here in Scottish politics. Alba and Greens have both said that they would get behind him.
But Tony, but the question you've got to ask about John Swinney is he was the future once, but is he the future now? I mean, he wants to win the election in 2026. Does he want to serve another 5 years after that as First Minister?
Well, I think that certainly is an important question, because a lot of people have said that, he would, as I say, just provide some kind of stopgap, and as a way to almost block the unionist parties from getting in through an early election. Now, John Swinney, as you say, he's done the rounds. He's already said today that he's taking it under serious consideration. However, I think that his answer this time last year, when Nicola Sturgeon hung up her boots, was that he wanted a new breath of fresh air. Well, this last 13 months of Humza Yousaf certainly was that, but it wasn't to everyone's liking.
No, absolutely. Well, Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News. Let's turn now to Neil Hanvey, the Westminster leader of Alba Party. Neil, thank you for coming to the studio. I bet you can't believe your luck. I mean, it's a complete implosion here, the SNP leadership.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't quite go as far as calling it luck. I mean, look, the SNP is an incredibly important party to many of us in Alba. A lot of us and many of our members devoted decades of time campaigning for that party. So it gives us absolutely no real pleasure to see the party in such turmoil. I don't think anyone, least of all Humza Yousaf, could have believed last Thursday morning when he decided to stamp his mark on the party that it would unravel so quickly and so decisively against him. And we're now in the preposterous situation where Humza the Brief, I think it was Alex Salmond who coined that phrase, if I suggest, well, Humza the Brief has now been replaced by Patrick Harvey as the de facto First Minister of Scotland, because he's the one who will have a say over which SNP MSP is palatable to the Greens, and that is the reality of where we are.
And that's why it can't be Kate Forbes, because of her views on religious issues, etc., which might be issues there with the Green Party.
Well, I think that illustrates precisely what the problem is. So Kate Forbes, who came tantalisingly close to winning the leadership election the last time, is being excluded from the race by Patrick Harvey and his Green Party colleagues. And that's a really a matter of deep concern and should concern every single SNP member, because that's not how internal party democracy is supposed to function. You can't have another party interfering with your internal processes, and sadly, that's where this whole shambles has led the SNP to.
Has it set back the cause of independence?
I don't think, well, it's not helped. let's just get that out of the way first. It's not helped. But, the independence movement is sitting north of 50% and has been for quite some time. During that time, the numbers for the SNP have continued to fall, and I anticipate that there will be a lot of anger against both the SNP and particularly the Green Party, because one of the things that we've discovered in all of this is that the Green Party's commitment to independence is a complete mirage. Their commitment to the environment is a complete mirage. The only issue that they're prepared to draw a red line over is gender identity and resisting the evidence that's contained in the Cass report. That's where they draw the line, and that's a very serious issue for everybody in Scotland, because those policies, as we've seen from the Cass review, are not consistent with good medical practice and equalities and human rights legislation.
And one of the SNP might go back to that kind of place in politics. So under Alex Salmond, of course, your leader now.
Yes.
That's why the party built that amazing coalition of support in the early 2010s.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Alex's first administration had 47 MSPs. He had to work with all of their parties. He made great progress delivering real improvements to the lives of the people of Scotland. And then in his the only administration to have a real majority from 2011. He continued to build and advance on that and was able to deliver that important goal of an independence referendum, which no one since has been able to come anywhere close to. But the fundamental difference with Alec and those who've come after him is that Alec was absolutely focused on delivering tangible outcomes for the people of Scotland. Everybody knew that life was better with Alec at the helm of the country. Whereas since then, and what we've been through with Nicola Sturgeon is there have been great headlines, but the substance underneath that has been
on
completely
schooling
absent.
and the merger of the police forces wasn't a great idea, or seemed to be that good.
Well, I think these things can work if you're prepared to put the effort in to work out the detail to make sure that the structures work. It's when you make big announcements like we're launching 2 ferries, but they're not ready.
Not built yet.
They're not ready to sail, or the fuel that they require is not available on the coast that they're going to be sailing from. Then you start getting into real difficulties.
How old history judge Humza Yousaf? Did you get to know him much when you first became?
I've only met Humza a few times, and he's a pleasant enough man. I think part of me. Besides the buruk that we've experienced over the last few days, he inherited a whole host of problems that were left behind by his predecessor, and it's really unfortunate for him that he's had to deal with this tumult of catastrophe raining down on him while he's been completely unable to stamp his authority on his administration. And the moment he tried to do it, he got it spectacularly wrong.
I guess John Swinney, his problem might be that he was around for much of the mistakes you're alluding to. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
And critics will be saying, well, you were around, you were deputy to Nicola Sturgeon through all that period.
Exactly. I mean, it's quite interesting that you raise that, because that's a point that we were discussing in my office this afternoon, that, whilst John does have a good track record, certainly in his years as Finance Secretary under Alex Salmond, he was riding shotgun with Nicola Sturgeon throughout all of those disastrous years. And it's only since he stood down, since Nicola stood down, that it's really come to, the disaster has come to light.
The one they worry about in the UK, I think, is Kate Forbes. She's the one who the unionists tell me they worry about.
Yes, well, Kate
because she's good.
She's an incredibly capable, bright and articulate woman who would be more than capable of leading an exceptional SNP administration. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But it's the Green Party who hold the keys to the SNP leadership. And ain't that just
the tail wagging the dog?
Thing?
The tail wagging the dog.
Absolutely.
Listen, Neil Hanby, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News in the studio. Really appreciate you coming in. Thank you. In a moment, after protests in the Republic of Ireland following an influx of asylum seekers crossing the border from Northern Ireland, Rishi Sunak has declared he is not interested in taking back migrants from Ireland. We'll turn to leading immigration lawyer for reaction shortly.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Good evening to you. Tomorrow, more wet weather to come in parts of the west, whereas in the east, it'll start to feel fairly warm in the late April sunshine. Low pressure is still dominating, but it's kind of slow moving, and it's in these western areas where we've seen outbreaks of rain today that we will again see them tomorrow. Staying fairly damp overnight across South Wales, southwest England. The rain easing a little across parts of Scotland. The heavy showers also easing in Northern Ireland, at least for a time. Staying largely clear across East Anglia and the southeast. Temperature-wise, a bit warmer than recent nights. Most urban areas, at least, staying up at 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. On to Tuesday, and as I said, it's a bit of an east-west split. We'll start with a lot of cloud across northern England, but I'm hopeful it'll brighten up here. There will be further rain for Wales and Northern Ireland, some heavy rain as well, the yellows and the reds in there, and it's also fairly wet for parts of southwest England. Pretty gusty in these western areas as well. A few showers in western Scotland, but a good part of Scotland dry. Much of northern England, the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast having a fine old day, and it will feel a bit warmer as well. Look at those temperatures, 17, 18, maybe even 19 Celsius, but still on the cool side where we've got the cloud and the breeze and the outbreaks of rain further west from that area of low pressure. That does pull away, allowing some warmer weather to move in over the next few days, but it is not going to be dry everywhere. There will still be some heavy rain around.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday at midnight on GB News.
Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak earlier today declared he is not interested in taking back migrants from Ireland after an influx of asylum seekers crossing their border from the north. He said the UK would not accept migrants returned from the EU via Ireland, when the EU, of course, is refusing to take back Channel migrants who come to England from France, many by small boats. The row continues to escalate after senior Irish ministers said they would draft emergency laws to send back refugees who had arrived from the UK to avoid them being deported to Rwanda. Well, I'm joined now here in the GB News studio in Westminster by Paul Turner, one of the UK's leading immigration barristers with over 20 years' experience. Paul, thank you for coming to the studio. What do you make of all this tension here? Do you believe that the issue in Dublin is caused by the Rwanda bill? Are people going there to escape being rounded up?
I think probably it's true, but I'm not sure whether it's people that are claiming asylum, they're arriving in Ireland straight away, or they're choosing to go to Ireland and they're claiming asylum. As I think Mark Francois was saying, we have an open border with Ireland, and I don't think that's ever going to close. So it wouldn't surprise me if people are making the trip over. But I think what it all behoves people that are patting the government on the back and Rishi saying, oh, it's having a wonderful effect. My understanding was, unless I've been reading the news or not paying attention, was that it was supposed to deter people from crossing the Channel. Now, I think anybody would know that so far we've had 7,167 people arrive this year, which is a record, up from 2022. And if the weather's good, it looks like there's going to be more. And obviously, Chris, looking at it, the Rwanda bill's been all over the newspapers. It's been heading to being passed, and it was passed.
Here's the Guardian today saying the very same thing here. I mean, I was just reflecting earlier, the government really would like to... That's a good headline. Even an advert couldn't pay for that, could they, for the government?
Well, I query whether it's a good advert for the government, because what it's essentially telling any asylum seeker or any lawyer that's slightly disreputable that represents asylum seekers is run away now. And my understanding is that and from other people that work in this area, that lawyers are advising their clients that if they report, they are likely to be detained, or there is a higher risk of them being detained. Now, given that these individuals have travelled halfway across the world and put their lives in danger with the small boats, if they're being told, well, if you go to the Home Office and report, there's a chance you're going to end up in a detention centre and on a plane to Rwanda, I would be very surprised if many people go to report. So it seems to me it's kind of counterproductive.
Have you seen the letters being sent out to try and find migrants to be sent?
I have seen some draft letters and sample letters which say you are a candidate for the return to Rwanda, or not return, you are a candidate for a trip to Rwanda. So they're sending these out to people, and I think that if people get them, then that's going to act as to dissuade them from reporting.
And where are these people? Are they in hotel rooms or are they in the community?
I think a lot of them, and this, Chris, is one of the real tragedies, a lot of them are in hotel accommodation. And this is because that following the previous piece of legislation, all those that arrived on small boats after about the mid last year, our claims are inadmissible, so they're not being processed. And I was looking at a report. There are about 40,000 people whose claims are inadmissible. The Home Office are just not touching them. They can't remove them, and the law says they can't process them. So these 40,000 people are sitting there...
In limbo.
In limbo, being paid for by the taxpayer.
Well, that makes little sense. So much this policy does. I just wondered whether do you think the PM is too soon to say that the scheme is working, judging by what's happening in Dublin and Ireland?
Well, I think he'll look for a win anywhere, to be honest.
Yes.
And I think that the reality will be, if we get a week or a month of good weather, are people going to still cross the channel? And the real tragedy would be, and listening to all the politicians all trying to pat each other on the back and saying it's splendid, is if we become a transit country for migrants, such as Italy is, where they arrive in Italy, they don't want to stay there because it's not very nice or they're not welcome, so they travel to France and then on to England. If they're going to travel on to Ireland but transit the United Kingdom, the small boats are still going to carry on arriving. And I believe Rishi Sunak said that they were stopping the small boats to save lives. If the people are just coming across, because they're not going to get on a boat from France to Cork, then the numbers, I don't believe, will go down. And also, the criminal gangs, I mean, they're selling a product. Come to the UK. I'm sure they're not saying to people, get on that dangerous small boat. And I saw you had the detail of how dangerous they are. Get on the small boat, take your Charles rubber ring, and by the way, you could be sent to Rwanda.
And you've been through the Rwanda Act now. You've seen where the loopholes are, the concerns maybe Robert Jenrick had when he resigned as Immigration Minister. Are we heading towards a big battle in July with the European Court of Human Rights?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Chris. I think what's going to happen is that pretty much everybody who has a representative is going to make a claim based upon their personal circumstances. And unless they have something extenuating or potentially mental health, then it's going to end up with Europe probably, and I would put money on this, issuing a Rule 39 injunction saying that the UK cannot remove people.
And that's the moment for the PM.
That's the moment where he's going to hope that, well, he will probably hope that if he steps up and defies Europe, the polls will change in his favour.
On the eve of what could be a long general election campaign going into the autumn.
Well, yes, it could. It's all teed up nicely for him, isn't it?
OK, well, listen, Paul Turner, an eminent immigration barrister, thank you for coming to the studio today and joining us on GB News.
Thank you, Chris.
Great to have you here, thank you. In a moment, following a packed-out debate in Parliament today, after more than 200,000 people signed a petition calling for assisted dying to be legalised, we'll speak to campaigners on both sides of this emotive issue. Next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the quaint Derbyshire village of Sudbury, there's a storm brewing between the local football club and the National Trust. This grass field might seem unremarkable, but for hundreds of years it's been part of the Sudbury Hall estate, playing host to the village football and cricket matches. Now the National Trust are planning to put an end to that tradition in the name of biodiversity, with plans for trees and plants where the football club play. Some worry it breaks a memorandum of wishes from the late Lord Vernon, whose family have lived here since 1660. Manager of Sudbury FC Tom Crutchley says he's upset at the decision.
Naturally disappointed. We've been here, this is our 9th year. We've put a lot of effort into here to keep playing, to maintain it. I'm from the village originally, so personally it was, it is very upsetting.
MP for Derbyshire Dale Sarah Dines says the National Trust aren't respecting the history of the site.
I feel they're trampling over the wishes of historic owners who gave up this wonderful site for the nation. And for over 100 years, people have played football and cricket here. It's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. And it's against the wishes of a lot of people locally who've written to me from the village.
Sudbury Hall lives under the branding of the Children's Country House, a decision which Dines says is disrespectful to the history of the estate.
I mean, this is fake to make it into a children's theme park. It's almost a reimagining, and in fact, that's the very words it says on their website. The house is reopened, it's been reimagined. I don't want our heritage to be reimagined. I think the National Trust has been captured by people who have different ideas than most people in this country.
Whilst the public will still be able to roam these historic grounds, the village feels like a legacy is being snatched away. Jack Carson, GB News, Sudbury.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Now, campaigners both for and against a change in the law on assisted dying have been gathering outside Parliament today as MPs took part in a packed-out Westminster Hall debate on the issue backed by Dame Esther Ranson. The Childline founder and broadcaster, who has stage 4 lung cancer, has said law reform in this area would mean she could look forward in confidence to a death which is pain-free, surrounded by people she loves. The petition for debate, which gained more than 200,000 signatures, stated, terminally ill people who are mentally sound and near the end of their lives should not suffer unbearably against their will. However, those who oppose the change in the law have voiced concerns that legalising assisted dying could put pressure on vulnerable people to end their lives for fear of being a burden on others, and argue that the disabled, elderly, sick or depressed could be especially at risk from family members. This was Tory MP Kit Malthouse earlier today.
The status quo is appalling. We have hundreds of people taking their own lives in this country, thousands dying agonising, horrible deaths who may wish to do something different. And, of course, we've got business class. So it's even worse. If you've got the money, you can have what the law denies to everybody else. It's an outrage, and it should change.
That's the former Cabinet Minister, Sir Kit Malthouse, giving his impassioned reasons why he thinks law should be changed in Parliament today. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by human rights campaigner and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, Peter Tatchell. The Peter supports changing the law and attended a demonstration in Parliament today. And also joining me for this discussion is Dr. Gordon MacDonald, the CEO of Care Not Killing. Now, Dr. MacDonald opposes assisted dying and attended today's debate in Westminster. Peter, Gordon, welcome here to Farage. Now, people want to relieve suffering. Why can't they? Gordon.
Well, we have very good palliative care in this country, but it's not good enough. 1 in 4 cancer patients don't get all the palliative care that they need. Palliative care is not properly funded. Only 30% of hospice funding comes from the NHS. So there are huge gaps. And so the question is, why are we not addressing the issue of the lack of proper palliative care funding and the lack of provision, whilst politicians are debating essentially what would be the cheap option, which is to allow people to end their lives through assisted suicide or euthanasia?
Peter Tatchell, I mean, Gordon's right, you're putting people at risk here who are very vulnerable.
Well, 84% of the public and a majority of doctors support assisted dying. They think that it's right that people should not have prolonged suffering and should have that option or choice. But of course, there are strong safeguards. Under Baroness Meach's bill, it would have to be authorised by 2 independent doctors plus a High Court judge. The person would have to be aged 18 or over. They'd have to have a diagnosis of a terminal illness and be expected to die within 6 months. So there are strong safeguards. And I would just say to everybody, we all want a quality of life. Let's also give people the right to a quality of death. Let's not prolong suffering. I've had friends who have been very seriously ill with terminal illnesses. They didn't immediately die. They suffered for months and months and months in agony. There was some palliative care, but it didn't stop the pain. It didn't give them a quality of life. I was just so upset and distressed to see the suffering they were going through. I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone, and I would like people to have a choice.
Gordon, a choice. That's all Peter Tatchell wants for his friends, seriously ill friends who may want to kill themselves.
Yeah, but the problem is choice becomes an illusion, and that's what we've seen in Canada, where people are not being given stair lifts, or disabled people are not being given stair lifts, but they're being offered euthanasia. They've been offered death.
Because that's cheaper, maybe.
Well, it's because it's not available. That's the point. Or there was a lady who went to the emergency department. She was suicidal. She'd tried to commit suicide before. She was looking for help. And she was told that she wouldn't be able to see a psychiatrist for 3 months. But they said, well, have you been considering medical assistance in dying? Now, whatever their intention in asking that question, the point was it was perceived to be suggesting it. And this is the problem, is that once you legalise this, especially if you put it in healthcare, what you do is you create a system that has its own momentum, and people who are vulnerable for whatever reason will feel that they're under pressure to end their lives.
Peter Tatchell, Lady Meach's safeguards there are doctors. And how can doctors know what pressure is being put on behind the scenes on people by family members who want to save money and go to Dignitas?
Well, as I said, the person would have to have a diagnosis of a terminal illness and be expected to die within 6 months. So merely suffering or claiming you're suffering, claiming you want to die, is not sufficient. There are these additional safeguards. And I think 2 independent doctors would not only do a physical assessment, but a psychological and emotional assessment as well. And then that would have to be approved by a High Court judge. So I understand people's concerns, but there are safeguards. And the examples we've just heard from George, they are not good examples. They are not acceptable examples. Just look at Australia and New Zealand, where they have had assisted dying for some years. It has worked well. There have been no cases that I'm aware of any abuses, because there are also safeguards there.
It works elsewhere, Gordon?
Well, it doesn't work in the countries where it's been there longest, the Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada, and Oregon. Even in Oregon, you have people with anorexia qualifying because they're defined as being terminally ill. It all comes down to the detail. The devil is in the detail, and in this case, what is a terminal illness? In the Scottish bill, which I know about, terminal illness is very broadly defined. It applies to many disabled people. Quite simply, you can't have a safe law, and the safeguards get removed over time.
Baroness Meach's bill does not allow for those kind of exceptions. Anorexia would not be acceptable. It's only in extreme cases. There's no wriggle room for people to twist and bend things. It's very precise, very limited, and does protect the vulnerable.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, did you speak in today's debate?
I didn't. I attended a lot of it and listened very carefully. I think the problem is that the safeguards don't remain and that the numbers grow as they have in every country that has adopted it. It goes up and up and up. And you don't know that somebody's going to live for 6 months or not. Doctors may say they do, but they don't. I knew a wonderful old man who was very proud of the fact that he'd gone on for 2 years after the doctor said he'd live for 6 months, and he was getting some special benefit that he got, he said, for longer than anybody else because he'd kept on going.
Is it for you, is it a faith issue? You're Catholic and that's why you preserve the sanctity of life is important?
Absolutely right. The sanctity of life is of fundamental importance to me. But there was a brilliant speech by Stephen Timms setting out from a Labour man's point of view the risk if the NHS goes from being a health service to being a death service.
Well, you heard from the great man there, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And coming up next, State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. But first, though, we're going to the weather with Alex Deacon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Good evening to you. Tomorrow, more wet weather to come in parts of the west, whereas in the east, it'll start to feel fairly warm in the late April sunshine. Low pressure is still dominating, but it's kind of slow moving, and it's in these western areas where we've seen outbreaks of rain today that we will again see them tomorrow. Staying fairly damp overnight across South Wales, southwest England. The rain easing a little across parts of Scotland. The heavy showers also easing in Northern Ireland, at least for a time. Staying largely clear across East Anglia and the southeast. Temperature-wise, a bit warmer than recent nights. Most urban areas, at least, staying up at 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. On to Tuesday, and as I said, it's a bit of an east-west split. We'll start with a lot of cloud across northern England, but I'm hopeful it'll brighten up here. There will be further rain for Wales and Northern Ireland, some heavy rain as well, the yellows and the reds in there, and it's also fairly wet for parts of southwest England. Pretty gusty in these western areas as well. A few showers in western Scotland, but a good part of Scotland dry. Much of northern England, the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast having a fine old day, and it will feel a bit warmer as well. Look at those temperatures, 17, 18, maybe even 19 Celsius, but still on the cool side where we've got the cloud and the breeze and the outbreaks of rain further west from that area of low pressure. That does pull away, allowing some warmer weather to move in over the next few days, but it is not going to be dry everywhere. There will still be some heavy rain around.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh my God, are you joking?
You're joking. Really? Seriously, it's not a wine. What is it?
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis. And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday at midnight on GB News.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Rwanda plan is already working as migrants are flooding into